A radical mutation is today underway. The consequences of this mutation are still not understood in their terrible magnitude. It has produced astonishing inversions. We remember that in communism, public mention of God was subversive. Well, today, public mention of God damages your dossier in the West. Totalitarianism has moved west. God banished to the private sphere. Any allusion to transcendence in public has become almost forbidden. Belief in God has become to be seen as a heresy, a politically incorrect transgression. Next. Next. Has lagging behind. Next. Well, the new secularist paradigm has lost track. Next. Okay. Back one slide. So this new secularist paradigm led to a general moral degradation. Morality is no longer a norm of correct behavior, but a mere lifestyle, a private choice, a matter of personal taste. Ethics no longer has canonical content. Ethics dissolves into aesthetics. Aesthetics dissolves into nihilism. Next. The decision to turn one's back on Jerusalem in favor of Athens, embracing reason alone as a foundation, has led to an impasse. The dominant Western culture is in crisis. It is secularized, de-Christianized, no longer with any anchor in transcendent reality, but only in the immanent. In the absence of God, the world has no ultimate reference or meaning. Now, the secularist state, as a surrogate for God, as Hegel put it, the legitimacy deficit of this state. Hegel in 1802 was the first who said God is dead in Glauben und Wissen. He understood the paradigm of Western civilization to have gone a radical change. From then onward, entire culture is in a context without God. Next. Hegel declared the end of the narrative based on the mistaken belief that morality could be founded on reason alone. Hegel abolished the Western rationalist project, replacing it with a political one. Moral norms are no longer dictated by God, but by the state. Next. Secularist moral consensus is philosophically impossible. The only possible consensus is historically determined. So Hegel says, after we moved away from transcendent God, the state becomes his substitute. The state is the march of God through the world. The state, of course, is a political construct. A political structure based on such premise becomes unsustainable, and today's political reality confirms this pessimistic diagnosis. Once canonical morality is abolished, you have many moralities legitimized by notions like social approval. Each society will have its own morality. Richard Rorty, mentioned by Professor Mahoney, also shows secular morality is political, being enforced, Rorty says, by state power. Next. Once secularized, morality stops being universal. The arbitrary nature of these moralities is inevitable because its arbiter is the state, which has no moral vocation. Who gives the state the right to exercise this function? The fact that the state is the only one having the coercive power to enforce these relative moralities. Next. Attempts to reduce moralities to a single morality failed. It turns out to be a political agenda imposed by the state. The state claims to be a surrogate for God and the ultimate normative reference. How can the state replace divine authority? The state cannot do that, but in practice it does. The authority of the secular state derives from brute force, nothing else. The proliferation of weak moralities leads to a fundamentalist secularist state imposing its own public morality. The state claims to have the appearance of legitimacy, and today's democratic state suffers from a major legitimacy deficit. With the death of Christendom, any hope of having a state authority founded on God has died. Next. The current dominant culture in the West applies a secular paradigm, an atheistic methodological postulate. The modern, postmodern state is only legitimized by force. Next. This claim is obviously non-democratic, and this legitimacy is just a myth. Next. The state has become a lifestyle choice made in practice by the politically correct ruling class. Like morality, secular theories about political legitimacy of the state are just political narratives. Next, 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 next. So, cultural wars, and I finish with this. We have between opposing conceptions marked by controversies and disagreements. The cleavage between dominant culture and traditional Christianity will intensify, and the progressive secularist ideology of denial of God does not happen spontaneously, but it is imposed by information war conducted according to military strategy. Next. Next one. Next one. So I have to finish that in this war, traditional Christians, next please. The traditional Christians, such as Father Canon, and actually all of us, I think, traditional Christians will resist propaganda and ideological pressures. We will oppose atheist manipulation and re-education. That is why these culture wars will continue and will intensify. We shall remain faithful to tradition. We shall continue to wage guerrilla cultural warfare against the fundamentalist secular state. Traditional non-secularized Christians, Catholic, Protestant, or Orthodox, with a history anchored in the incarnation and resurrection of God, we seem strange, we seem bizarre to the mainstream culture. However, as the atheist progressives become more hostile and aggressive and intolerant and label us as bigots, fundamentalists, extremists, fascists, homophobes, intimidating us, the more we will offend this dominant cultural elite through politically incorrect positions. Our refusal to accept the immoral norms of a secular state will challenge this political secular agenda, and we shall try to remoralize the public space. We shall be seen as reactionaries. Nevertheless, we will not give up. Next, and final. A large part of mainline Christianity, radically secularized, will also adopt the posture of the mainstream culture. We, the traditional Christians, we shall refuse to adopt such rhetoric and the compromises with the mainstream atheist culture. In such a state, any public allusion to transcendence will continue to be marginalized or forbidden. Nevertheless, we shall refer to transcendence. As the fundamentalist state becomes totalitarian and intensifies the repression against traditional Christians, we shall continue to oppose and reject these totalitarian tendencies. We shall keep to our Christian paradigm, and we will not be deceived by propagandistic myths. We will not be brainwashed by cliches and stereotypes of political correctness. In this post-God culture, the presence of God will endure in traditional Christianity, which will not be abolished. Culture wars will continue, and God is the truth, the truth cannot be hidden under the bushel of progressivism. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I don't know about you, but I began the panel after listening to the dear father wanting to be a painter and draw icons, and by the end I'm ready to fight. So thank you for those illuminating words. I'm sorry, but you will dislike me for this. We will have no discussion. We have to go right to the next panel. Thank you very much. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Father. That was really good. And you don't paint icons, right? You write them, right?
My wife paints in a time.
Hello everyone. I would like to invite my guests, my speakers for today to join me, Mr. Bren Brown and Ms. Stephanie Lind. I would like to join us to the stage, and Mr. Dugaggio. Thank you very much for your patience. So, hello everyone. My name is Mina Cristiana. I'm the president of NGO Armonia la Mina, which is a Christian cultural association. So, since 3 years ago, I started promoting Byzantine music as a sound healing therapy, as a prayer, because I was a New Age practicant. I was a paganism, like polytheist, yoga, Indian, and rituals. I did not know God. Who is this? No one told me. Through Byzantine music, I found what is praying and silence. In a digital distraction area where we find so much noise, Byzantine music learns to pray and hear the silence. So today we are talking of the philosophy of imagination and how the art of the sacred, either is literature, music, philosophy, or movie, has transformed to Christianity. And here I want to remember us. In 1985, Prince Vladimir sent someone to hear the liturgy in Hagia Sophia. That moment when they said, I didn't know if it's heaven on earth, changed the future of Russia. And the Prince Vladimir become the Saint Vladimir, who made the biggest baptisms in Russia. So he canceled the paganism. Perun, statue, and idols were all burned. For me, it was a true example that I'm not the only one who met Christ so late. So what it here us for today is that we learn to express Christianity as the biggest artists do in the history. In Romania, Brâncuș, when it was in Paris, he was a chanter. He built the sculptures through chanting. Through his silence and his praying, he built the biggest opera in the world. And not only him. In the movie and cinematic area, Tarkovsky bring Rublev through sacrifice and through a sin, he built his silence. Why he couldn't paint Rublev? Why the sin blocked his creativity and the art of freedom? And how a child like Boris remove this blockage, and that's why he painted Holy Trinity. Besides of this, I heard mention of Karamazov brothers, and we will talk about this. But first of all, I want to say you something. Byzantium has lived through his legacy and left us a memory. What we are looking today is not a political crisis. Is failure of memory, failure of roots, and failure of community. This is what we lost in the modern ways. And today with my speakers, we will gather this and discuss of the freedom of art in creationity and the philosophy of imagination. So, besides me is Ms. Stephanie Lind, which I like very much to introduce, a political activist, and a great mother, a strong warrior, a warrior of God, and a very big mother of 5 kids. And she will talk us today about what it means faith and family today, as she is the president of Make Europe Heal Again, Good Again. And also Mr. Dugaciu, professor at University of Bucharest, geopolitical analyst, will talk about the difference of the culture between East and West. And Mr. Brown here today will gather us for a speech. So I want you to ask you who is the first one to come in line. Mr. Dugaciu, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So standing between you and the lunch isn't a complicated, difficult mission, but I'll do my best. So I was asked, my name is Dan Dugaciu, I was asked to speak about the Eastern tradition, Christianity, Orthodoxy, and the title of my presentation is If Nietzsche Had Been Born in the East. So allow me to begin with a very short biographical clarification. So, yeah, by training I'm a sociologist and a graduate of Faculty of Sociology, University of Bucharest. I also attended for 2 years the Faculty of Orthodox Theology at the University of Bucharest. And as a sociologist, I taught courses in the sociology of religion in Bucharest. And later my work shifted towards international relations and non-military dimensions of security. I'm also a politician, you know nobody's perfect. But one of them, as far as I'm concerned, one of the most important topic and challenging topic for me is secularization, and how comes that we live in a completely different context and milieu. And the main point of my presentation is that secularization is a theological issue. Yeah, you've got here Carl Schmitt, Henri de Lubac, John Milbank. I'm not going to go into this, but it's an Eastern perspective, so to speak. So secularization as a theological issue. It's this is not a topic, theology and sociology, they do not fit. So in the academic realm, if we go there and say, okay, I'm a believer, they say, no, you cannot be because you are not neutral, right? So you are supposed to be neutral because according to Max Weber's canon, we have to be neutral, so you have to be able to understand the phenomenon. But the point is, if you are a believer, you are not neutral. If you are a non-believer, you are neutral, right? So the point is, yeah, how comes that you could understand better what is going on in the liturgy in the church if you are a non-believer? So that's the main challenge. So actually, it's a tertium non datum. You cannot be in the church and in and out in the same time. So it's very challenging. And I used to be academic for many years. So if you are a believer, you are situated, as the postmoderns would say. If you are a non-believer, you are non-situated, you are an academic. But you don't understand a thing from the religious phenomenon if you don't have this sort of experience. Because Max Weber's canon was about verstehen, understanding what is going on. But if you don't believe in God, you cannot understand the believer, right? You can talk about him or her, but you cannot understand the phenomenon. So basically, it's not about neutrality. It's about we are in the Michel Foucault type of universe in which the power to define neutrality. So it's about power. It's not about knowledge. It's about the power to define neutrality. So if you are not neutral, you're not supposed to talk academically about these type of things. So very briefly, my main point is that sociologically speaking, a figure such as Friedrich Nietzsche would have been inconceivable within the Orthodox spiritual universe. And the argument is that, Nietzsche's assertion that God is dead does not mean that God has ceased to exist. And rather, it describes the moment when God ceases to function as the ontological and existential center of Western culture. But this is a process, and the process is leading to these conditions may be summarized as follows. Very briefly, the separation of nature and grace, the excessive accentuation of divine transcendence, the reduction of grace to a created reality, the autonomization of reason, the rise of individualism, and then secularization. So, and here is a theological, very important issue, because God is not rejected all at once. He gradually becomes unnecessary. The world begins to function as thought it no longer needs him. Politics organizes itself without him. Science explains reality without him. Morality attempts to survive without him. This is the situation described by Nietzsche. And you have days, for example, we need God is an hypothesis, but we don't need this hypothesis anymore because we have the law of nature, mechanics, and so on and so forth. So the main point is that for an Orthodox theologians influenced by the tradition of Palamas, for example, such a development is difficult to imagine in a spiritual universe where God is understood as ontological present through his uncreated energies. So it's the main point of the theology of uncreated energies and its significance is this. It's one of the most important, I think, theological recoveries of the 20th century, was the recovery of Grigore Palamas. This was not merely an exercise in historical theology, it represented the recovery of an entire vision of the relation between God, humanity, and the world. At the center of this vision stands the doctrine of uncreated energies, explain how God remains both transcendent and genuinely present in creation. In this sense, Nietzsche's declaration that God is dead may be understood as describing the destiny of a particular trajectory of Western civilization rather than that of Christianity as a whole. Orthodox theologians, such as Dumitru Stăniloae has been mentioned here, Romanian theologian, Lotsky, Meyendorff, Philip Sherrard, Christos Yanaras, regarded as Palamite theology as providing an explanation for why God could never become, within Orthodoxy, merely an idea that could be discarded. And the Issachar controversy in the 14th century was not about prayer techniques. It's not about fundamentally prayer techniques, as it has mentioned in the history of Eastern theology many times. It was not about monastic practice. It's concerned a question centered with Christianity itself. Can human beings truly experience God, or can they only possess indirect knowledge about him? I mean, this is essential, because the answer in 14th century of Varlamov of Calabria and other opponents of Palamas argued that God is so transcendent that direct access to him is impossible. So it's out there somewhere. Human beings know only created effects, symbols, intellectual representations, or concepts of God. Palamas responded with this famous distinction between the divine essence, ousia, and the divine energies, energia. God's essence remains inaccessible and incomprehensible. Neither angels nor human beings participate in the divine essence. But the divine energies, however, are uncreated, and God himself as he manifests himself to creation. This distinction neither defines God nor introduces two divine realities. Rather, it explains how God can remain absolutely transcendent while also being genuinely present in the world. So for Palamas, the light witnessed by the apostles on Mount Tabor was neither symbolic nor created. It was the uncreated glory of God himself. So these implications of this doctrine are immense, I would say. For Palamas, the universe is neither an autonomous machine nor barely a material thing. The world is not separated from God. And it is not God, yet it exists continually in participation with him. And the cosmos is therefore sacramental. It's very interesting, the work of Mircea Eliade, and he wrote a lot about cosmic Christianity in Eastern Europe. So it's about, and he quoted Romanian fairy tales and folk narratives, and God is everywhere. They could be at the end of a bridge dressed as a beggar, and God is there, but also Satan. So basically, God is it's a very popular version of Palamite doctrine, but the idea that God is with us everywhere, it's something very different from the way in which deism is looking at God, or I don't know, a Western theological tradition. And this is the reason maybe that Eastern Europe remained for many, many years so pre-modern, so to speak. I mean, just one example, and I will end here. You know the famous Machiavelli, The Prince, 1513. Machiavelli, according to Pierre Manon, is the first liberal. He invented the secular space, political secular space. The ruler's primary duty is to maintain power and preserve the state. Moral considerations are secondary. In 1517, 3 years later, a similar book had been published in nowadays Romania. The same type of literation, Mirror of Princes is called, Advices for the Prince. And this book is called Teachings of Negoe Basarab to his son Teodosie. Basically 3 years later, right? So you've got Machiavelli and Negoe Basarab. And the main idea is this: the ruler's primary duty is to govern justified before God. Religion is the very foundation of politics. Two books, completely different traditions, completely different consequences. So, the last point, I'm not going to talk about Dimitri Staniloae or Meindorf or other Philip Sherrod or other theologians. So, my conclusion, the 20th century rediscovery of Grigori Palamas represents not merely the recovery of the Byzantine theology, but the recovery of entire Christian ontology. Within this ontology, God is not a distant idea, but a living presence in which human beings may participate through his uncreated energies. The cosmos is not an autonomous machine, but a sacramentally space. Human beings are not isolated individuals, but persons called to communion and deification. From this perspective, the difficulty of imagining an orthodox Nietzsche does not arise from the absence of critical thought or philosophical reflection, but from the very ontological structure of the Eastern Christianity vision of reality. Where God is perceived as present within the very fabric of existence, the notion of his culture that becomes exceedingly difficult to conceive. For this reason, the theology of uncreated energies may be understood not only as one of the central doctrine of orthodoxy, but also as one of the most profound explanations for the divergence between the religious experience of the Christian East and the process of secularization that has so deeply shaped Western modernity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Dungaciu. It was very nice to hear again about the great Grigore Palama. So now I'll invite Mr. Fanelin to join us as a very big political activist, the president of Make Europe Healthy Again. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, this is supposed to be a panel on creativity. I unfortunately have been more procreative than creative. I do have 5 children. I had 4 children in New York City, and then I moved to LA. And I would like to have a whole nother set of kids, which I am currently in the process of convincing my husband to do. That would be more, I have like benevolent dictator fantasies. That would be more like Elon Musk rather than young Catholic. You have 9 though, right? Yes, I just entered the church in 2019. So I have 5 children so far. And I'd like to talk to you today about fertility. And I'd actually just like to start with a personal comment, because I had a lot of children, and then I did a lot of activism work because I hate totalitarianism. I studied this particularly as a child. And so I was like, oh, we've seen this before. In New York City, they were like, papers, please. To enter the grocery store. I was like, oh no, oh, it's on. No way in my era. I was ready to go. I'd read Solzhenitsyn, whose name I can pronounce, and we'll convince you of that later. But this response during COVID was something. I was in young motherhood and a very monastic experience with having I had 5 children in 7 years. And then I did a lot of COVID era work. But whether you're a person who has been stewarding political leadership for decades, or whether you're a person who became very activated during the COVID era, the people that I've talked into this room are just doing projects of civilizational consequence. Amazing concepts, things that you're studying. The intellectual feast that we've seen today has been marvelous. So thank you guys for everything that you're doing and the personal cost that you've paid to become who you are. And I just want to edify you and insist on it. I really want you to love one another. to support one another, to actually, like, there's a lot of intellectuals and people who are politicians here. If you're a business person, give them contracts, collaborate, syndicate with one another in business, have one another on each other's podcasts. My children, I'm very like militant about this. You know, they'll complain. I'll say, help your brother with the dishwasher. You will die for your brother. Like, you will empty the dishwasher for him, you know, and I'm intense about it. And I don't think you could be too intense, saying here as European conservatives, you need to love and serve and collaborate with one another. And I say this with intensity to my children and to you because during the COVID era, there were people who were really at great personal cost, spending themselves to fight evil. And when David sent Uriah to the front lines and told the troops to withdraw from him, the Lord called that murder. Rightly so. So with totalitarianism, if there's an encroachment of freedom, do something or help anyone who's doing something. It's not complicated. You don't have to know a lot. If you have any skills at all, apply your skills to help someone that you believe is doing something, not even that will be successful, but just should be done on principle. Like Pfizer deserved to be sued on principle. They received money, mandated an experimental product, hid data, and then said, we're going to bury the evidence for 75 years. We sued them. We said, no, we FOIA requested them. You will show us this evidence. You will not wait till everyone in the room is dead. So I just want to edify you to love one another. And thank you to the organizers. Robert, you are amazing. Everything that you're working on for Robert, for the 250th anniversary is amazing. I want to encourage you. We would really like to have an event in Venice. Would be lovely. Not when it stinks in summer, but like spring, and to gather with one another. Wouldn't you guys like that, to have an event somewhere beautiful? So I'd like to briefly talk about demographics because we do have a fertility crisis, and I would like to speak to that briefly before I discuss how we make more of ourselves, how we create more of ourselves in response to both good and to evil. So with fertility, it is our human birthright to be self-sustaining in our fertility. When Elon Musk was recently asked what are the urgent problems facing humanity, this issue was what he spoke to, because replacement level fertility is the invisible architecture behind everything that we've been talking about. Without it, human capital required to staff, maintain, and repair systems at scale begins to disappear. Between the 1950s and 2020, we were in this golden era of cheap everything that is over and will never be repeated. It was based on three things: long, secure supply chains, and cheap human labor, and cheap energy. And this era is over, and it will never return. Now, a lot of ancient kings, King David, Caesar Augustus, they ordered censuses because they intrinsically understood that the strength of an empire is partly based on the strength of its people. Our modern kings, the modern kings of modernity, don't seem to have an understanding of this. It's a staggering oversight, because demographic replacement is not something that can be compensated for with technology, with fiscal policy, or global coordination. There's no amount of coordination that can preserve modern complexity without it. And so the World Economic Forum and other institutions are really planning for a world that, because we aren't having children, it just doesn't exist anymore. And this is the really important point that I'd like to make as an economist that you need to understand. Modern complex economies are specialized economies, and specialization only works at scale. I fear that our complex civilization will not downshift smoothly. If depopulation continues on its current trajectory, the outcome will not simply be de-globalization and de-specialization, but in many cases it will result in functional de-civilization. So we simply need to be having more children. It's a really serious issue. When demographic collapse breaks, failures then compound across the entire system. So that's what I would like to say about making more children. Please participate and do your part if you can. Support mothers. Another thing that really affects fertility is cities, and how cities affect how many children we decide to have. So I'd like to talk very briefly about cities, because we understand what makes for human flourishing and thriving in cities. It's mixed-use neighborhood materials that age with dignity, civic squares that give people a reason to linger, walkable streets, things that are built to human scale. When you have the elderly and the disabled and mothers with young children when you build cities around automobiles, it really excludes people who cannot drive. And so that's a major issue, that we need to create cities around human flourishing and around our most vulnerable, rather than automobiles. And this is something that you guys addressed a little bit in the last conference that you had, and I was so glad that you were addressing architecture and how that informs human flourishing. Just wonderful that you're focusing on that, because I think that it's really important. I think that we're going to see a shift towards totalitarian surveillance methods, where we have 15-minute cities where people are on ID, they're ID'd, medical ID'd, they have QR codes, and with totalitarianism, there's this like terrible constriction of power up to the top, where everyone below has rules but no responsibility, and they're all just like, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I'm sorry, I can't help you, and you're just, when I go to the airport, I just think I will die. I will live so that the whole world does not feel like an airport where you're scanned and surveyed and checked, and I'm going to, go through the scanner, and there's leaking here. So that, that we don't have a proliferation of control systems like what we saw with COVID. And in closing, I just would like to talk about how the Byzantine and monastic traditions of love of God inspire us to create more of ourselves, and also how we become more substantial as people through fighting evil and tyranny. So, as Daniel Mahoney says, there is some evil that becomes significant enough that it requires resistance. And when we name an evil and we grow to fight it, we oftentimes get into the ring and we realize that we need to become more knowledgeable, better financed, better connected in order to win. And when we go up against evil, we learn how to make more of ourselves in order to do what needs to be done. And what I found is that evil and totalitarianism and the consolidation of power, it seems to just be relentless. It just seems like it's like this, and you aim it from one thing, and then it's not successful, and it morphs and it shifts. So there needs to be a constant prayer and vigilance and fighting. Everyone needs to stop building what you're doing in yourself and take time just to be destructive towards evil, just at a sacrifice, just obstinately resistant, even if it doesn't benefit you, even if you don't get any recognition for it, just to spend yourself for the vulnerable. Stopping evil in whatever forms that it takes. You need to stop it early with decisive, clear, principled action. And in conclusion, I'd like to talk about how love makes more of us, and how we create out of this incredible monastic Byzantine tradition, because what has come out of the East is absolutely magnificent, and love does the most wonderful thing. When we're before an icon or sacred music, it sharpens our attention. It seems to just make the world luminous, and our whole being becomes porous, receptive, a sense of being alive, like it's spring. And love seems to always come with a feeling of surprise, like you discover the beloved, or you have a child, or my child with Down syndrome did something that she wasn't supposed to do, or you see something in an elderly person. And the surprise, it pulls your center of gravity outside of yourself. And there's a humility in that, because there's a sense of, I'm not worthy of this divine revelation of love, this uncreated light that I'm experiencing in this person in front of me. And the right response to that isn't to try and take the beloved, but to give. And it just would happen that the thing that the beloved loves most, my daughter with Down syndrome, is me. So then I'm inspired through love to actually become a better, different person in response to love. And this makes more, when we were talking about the substantiveness of our families or our institutions, love makes more of you, because you also are inspired to become more for the beloved and to build more things. So I think that if we had really had greater love in our marriages and continuity between the generations and intergenerational creation of wealth, we would build more fountains, we would build more beautiful bridges, we would build more beautiful cities, which I encourage us to have more conversations and talk about building beautiful cities, places for human flourishing. And this richness within the family and becoming more of a quality, substantive person is something that we do in response to love. because when words fail to hold weight, we want to make something with intention, imagination, time, effort, and skill, so that we're not just expressing feelings. We want to materialize our love. And so we become more by giving. It's like fire. We're so trained in the things of mammon that with water, I have something and I give some to you, and then I have less. But with fire, like when we light candles at the Easter or Christmas tradition, when I light your candle, there's no diminishment, and that's how God loves. When God gives himself in love, he actually multiplies himself into the other person. And so we have a desire to be worthy of the beloved that draws forth capacities that we may not even have known that we had. And it also causes us to want to work at the edge of our ability, because suddenly the difficult thing, the discipline, the patience of the craft, it feels like the obvious response to love. And in this way, love changes what we're willing to sacrifice. So I want to close with a blessing out of Colossians 1, 9, and 10. Paul prayed for the saints that they would be filled with the knowledge of his will and all spiritual wisdom and understanding, it's so that you may walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to him. I want to please God. Don't you? Don't you want to walk in a manner that's worthy of Christ? To be found worthy when we are the beloved, it grows us outside of our giftings and proclivity, and it deepens us. When we're talking about this facade, this like lack of inherent meaning in families, institution, and government, a lover doesn't want applause. He wants to have given enough, and you never quite feel like you have, which drives you to write another book, to create another arch, to do more and to be more creative. So God, who is creative, as sons of God, we're made in his image, and I think that we grow in order to love him more in really multifaceted ways. We also express divine creation through the creating of children. I used to have a joke, because in New York, it's like, you have 5 kids, and I would say they're super easy to make, which is not a joke my children appreciated or something I say anymore, because we're obviously in a fertility crisis. No one laughed at that joke. No? Okay. Kids are super easy to make. But yeah, so we create children, which is something that we create in our own likeness and nature. And lastly, we create more of ourselves through responding to divine love and uncreated energy. And we also create through responding to evil and growing ourselves in relation to discover capacities that we've never had as we grow to contend the great evils of our age. And there's a lot of things to do. You guys have Black Sea development, gas projects with Neptune Deep that are going to be very consequential. You guys need to really clean up your tax situation. Can you actually raise your hand? Do you guys stand up? Can you stand up? Do you guys know Samuel? This man has revelation from God, and if anyone is interested in really changing the tax structure, what do you have, 500,000 people that you speak to? Thank you, you can sit down. Please come talk to him. You guys really need to fix the tax situation in your country, because fathers need to be able to provide for their families, and I believe that there are solutions from heaven to do this, but what you are stewarding here over long periods of time is truly exceptional. The quality of people that I have met at this event are first class. Thank you so much to the organizers for having me. This is absolutely marvelous, and thank you for everything that you're doing in the East to provide thought leadership, serious academic engagement with very important ideas, and an example coming out of this region from the world to the West. I just appreciate and adore and love you guys so much, and I can't wait for the next event where we're able to be together. Hopefully in Venice or someone really romantic. I'll leave you to decide, but that would be amazing. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Stephanie, for this powerful talk regarding the power of love, our love for God and our love for each other, the power of sacrifice for our beloved, the power of family and faith, and how this love goes to creation, to delivering good habits, good family, and good society. Thank you so much, Ms. Stephanie. Our next speaker is Mr. Brenner Brown, a great philosopher and researcher, so I'll be waiting for you here.
Thank you so much. It's a blessing to be back in Romania. The last time I was in this part of the world, I was detained briefly entering Moldova. My welcome to Romania was a lot better than my welcome to Moldova, and it's been great to get to chat with some of you and learn much. Richard knows because we were detained together. I was a bit longer. I'm going to start, I think, in perhaps not the most obvious way. I want to start by things that may divide East and West, things that may divide Catholics. I'm a Catholic, have 9 children, I'm a convert to Catholicism, but I love Orthodoxy. But instead I'm going to start on what may divide us, and it's even in the title of what we are to be speaking about. Liberty, I think, for all Christians, there is an understanding of liberty that's quite at odds with what modernity or postmodernity say about liberty. Most of us are told that liberty is freedom from this, freedom from that, not freedom to. But if we look in scriptures and we look at what St. Paul says about freedom, for a Christian, freedom is friendship and obedience to Christ. It's not just freedom from, it's not just I'm able to do whatever I want. That is not true freedom. Instead, that's a form of slavery. It's slavery to be bound up in sin. It's slavery to have to do things which separate you from your Creator. So I think we pretty much agree on that. Then you get to philosophical imagination. Well, imagination, it's quite interesting that that's in the topic of the speech, and we're talking about light coming from the east, because imagination, if you go back to John Climacus, all the way back in the 5th and 6th century, and you read the Ladder of Divine Ascent, it's very common from even before him in Eastern theology to take imagination and put it with 2 different forms of knowledge. One is nous, and nous is real knowledge, knowledge of God, knowledge that's high, knowledge that's real. And imagination is often translated as fantasia. Fantasia, like the word that follows it, fantasy, imagination is not viewed very well in traditional Eastern theology. And I'm willing to be corrected, but imagination is something else. It's not necessarily a good thing. So on its surface, imagination is something that removes you from God. If you're looking at an icon or if you're praying, you're not emptying yourself out. You're not trying to get directly connected to God's divine energies. Instead, you're thinking of other things that may separate you from God. And that is often contrasted with forms of prayer, especially the Ignatian method in the West, of conceiving of images or scenes from Christ's life in the middle of prayer. But I want to posit something that I think is true in a number of cases. And this is not to say that we don't have great differences. But perhaps when the West says imagination, or perhaps when we put imagination up on this screen, it is actually closer to nous. Perhaps we're taking words that don't exactly mean the same thing and assigning different meanings based on our context, and that the difference is not as wide as one might think. What I mean is, in this sense, we look at a philosophical imagination, we can interpret that to mean nous. We can interpret that to say what brings us closer to fundamental reality, what brings us closer to God. Nous, at the highest level, is spiritual vision, seeing reality as it actually is. And perhaps imagination isn't just thinking of scenes or acts or images, but attempting to place ourselves within divine reality. I say all this because for the last 15 or 20 years, I've spent a lot of time trying to understand the Orthodox world. What I realized 20 years ago was that the direction of Western Europe was a direction of suicide. It was going in a very wrong way. And the friends that I met in the East and started to talk to, including priests, I was able to visit Mount Athos 6 times. I've tried to, through encounter and personal relationship, learn, is that there was something strong left here. There was something here that outlived communism, something here that even with communism, or perhaps because of what you experienced, There was a strength of will to not go in the direction of a denial of who you are. A denial of who you are as Romanians, a denial of who you are as Georgians, Serbs. In each way, each of these cultures were trying to connect back to something that was more important. And if you talked to whether it was priests or people coming back to the faith, there was a strong desire to stop what was seen as Western liberalism from rolling over your countries. And things were and are better here. If you look at birth rates, for example, I'm sad to say that if you look at Italy or France or places that are supposed to be Catholic countries, it is a demographic winter. Even in the last 4 years, we've gone down further in France and Italy, where you're going down to 1.2, 1.1. You're not in great shape here, but 1.6, 1.7 is a lot better. Other Eastern countries haven't done as well. But there at least has been a strong attempt on the part of many to stop this sort of attack on family, on your nations existing in the future. So that's why I began to say I want to learn more. And typically when we look at the divide between Catholicism and Orthodoxy, we're the rationalists. Experience and mystery are key in Orthodoxy. Again, I have to paint with a broad brush. I have 10 minutes. I know it's much more complicated, but that's the sort of view. I will say that in the West, with phenomenology, with Husserl, after Husserl, Pope John Paul II embraced phenomenology. Increasingly, there was an understanding that purely rational concepts devoid of experience cannot encapsulate human knowledge. That the way we come to know things isn't simply by reading a book. You can't know Mount Athos by reading a book. You have to go, you have to experience it. You cannot know many things without experience. About a month ago, we had an event in Rome with Cardinal Mueller, great cardinal, great Catholic thinker, and he was talking about high philosophy, but then he said, well, my mother, she never read Heidegger. She never read any of this, but she knew the Nazis were evil. She knew from the beginning. The experiential knowledge of being embedded within a tradition of moral inquiry, that's what Alistair MacIntyre calls it, being embedded within Catholicism or being embedded within Orthodoxy gives you a sort of knowledge that you never can get from just a rationalistic analysis of what someone believes. My point is that there is a move on the West to move more in a direction where experience, friendship, interaction, what Pope Francis called the philosophy of encounter, that you're not going to know a thing without encountering it. And that goes deeply to who we are as conservatives. What I mean is conservatives believe in rootedness, in place, in time, in tradition, in custom. There's a rootedness. Now, we don't say that every culture that's rooted in time and place, custom and tradition is the same. So, once the archaeologists unearthed and were able to decipher the hieroglyphs of Egypt, for 3,000 years, we don't have one thinker or person in Egypt questioning the institution of slavery. 3,000 years. That's a pretty constant tradition. Was it a good tradition? No. We have the great benefit, however, of living after Christ, after the incarnation, after, as was said earlier, the finite and infinite came together in giving us the truth in a person, in a relationship. Because of that, when we are in our different countries that are rooted in Christian truths, and we want to understand what is most important, we need to look at those concepts, those realities that are shared and that are attacked by those who wish to undermine Christian civilization. So we step back, we try and learn from one another, we experience one another, and then we look and try and understand what Alistair McIntyre calls a tradition of moral inquiry, that I have to understand your palamas, I have to understand your tradition before I'm able to even begin to criticize it. In the same way, I think, for Orthodox, understanding that all of Catholic philosophy is not only St. Thomas Aquinas, okay? That's not everything. There's a lot more than this. By the way, my confirmation name is Thomas Aquinas, but don't hold that against me. I think he was a great philosopher, but it's not the end. It's not the end. So we understand one another, and then we realize that after the French Revolution, where you posit the turn in philosophy can be different. Richard Weaver, in Ideas That Have Consequences, said, well, everything went downhill after William of Ockham. Nominalism destroyed the notion of objective reality, and therefore it undermined and was at the root of the decay of our civilization. Others try and say the Protestant Reformation. I say that's wrong. My Protestant brothers have been allies very strongly in the fight for faith and family and life around the world. I personally believe that Machiavelli is part of this, but the real world that we live in was created under the philosophes, the French Revolution, the frontal attack on faith and family. It is no coincidence that Rousseau, so well loved by so many postmodernist and some modernist philosophers, wrote a whole book on child rearing, and he put all 5 of his children in an orphanage. Okay, all 5 of those children were put in an orphanage. No connection between the lived experience of virtue and being able to tell everyone else how you should live. It's no coincidence also that after the killing of the king, it took a very small amount of time to not simply hate Christianity or hate the church, but to take over Notre Dame and put in a goddess of reason and to attempt to replicate what Christianity had done with symbol liturgy. To have new priests come and bow down at the altar of the goddess of reason. It is never enough to simply say Christianity is wrong. But that also points to a very important fact, that what we share together, all Christians who believe in Christ as the incarnation, what we share together is that we are the fundamental reality. What the progressives and radicals are doing is creating a new heresy. They are imitating mostly the goods that Christianity has. They're attempting to replicate those goods, but they are not themselves the reality. They are not themselves representing anything real. They are a deviation, an attempt to imitate, an attempt to clone, because you cannot get rid now, because of the incarnation, for the human desire for connection to God. You cannot get rid of it. So Nietzsche tried, others have tried, and many people will die. Marx, many people have died because of the attempt to try this. Instead, what you have are new heresies. What is woke? Woke is a form of Gnosticism. There is a certain elite that have a secret knowledge about the nature of what is fundamentally real, that race, class, and gender are the new trinity of what we must worship, and that if you fail to worship it, if you don't show up at the parade, if you don't fly that flag, you're a heretic, to be ostracized, attacked. I won't go on much longer, but I do think that the insights of René Girard on the nature of what Christ did to human history, that 3 components of Girard's thought: mimetic desire, collective violence, and good scapegoat. Very good, thank you. A scapegoat, that all of human history is based on this. That all of human history is based on the fact that people don't desire things or goods in and of themselves. They desire through mimesis, through imitating what others desire. And when groups or individuals desire the same thing, you have conflict. And out of that conflict, a scapegoat has to emerge. And throughout history, there was horrible, human sacrifice, kicking people out of the community as a scapegoat. One person who was even innocent, it didn't matter. That sacrifice had to occur. What does Christ do? Because Christ is not man. We're having a... God's deciding to shut me down. You're speaking too much. So Christ ends the cycle because Christ is God and man. There is no higher sacrifice than Christ as the incarnation going on the cross and dying for all of us. For us, the cycle's done. But when you see these attacks that many of us have experienced, I helped lead a number of campaigns to define marriage as the union of a man and a woman in constitutions. We were successful. I thought success would be great. Success just meant that we had death threats, physical attacks, collective violence. Someone has to be sacrificed. All of the things that we see that woke does, attacking us, saying that we're fascist or what other, trying to make us suffer, all of those things are imitations of Christianity. And the beauty is they can't escape it. The beauty is that no one can escape that us in the West and the East have had this incarnation that has changed all of human history. What is left to us is to stand together, Christians of all faiths, and refuse to bow down to any new idol in whatever form it is, whether it's DEI, whether it's woke, whether it's everyone has to get this vaccine, whether it's whatever it is. Our job is to unite together to create a civilization of love built around the fundamental truths that we share: family, life, our own traditions and customs, which are instantiated in different ways in different countries, and are a great gift from God that Romanians are Romanians, Georgians are Georgians, and to not allow any power, whether it's the EU, whether it's your own government, to undermine the fundamental authenticity of who you are as a people, who we are as a people, united together under a Christian civilization. Even those that are not Christian can respect that this is a Christian civilization. And to realize that we're not being asked to do that much. Stand up in any way you can. Work together. Don't bow down to false idols. And realize that I believe the future is very bright if we only work together, stand together, love one another. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your speech, Mr. Brian Brown. We have only 1 minute. I have only one question, and I want us to share your opinions. So my question is that when freedom becomes a power, a virtue, and when it becomes sin, and how is this described in West and East? So the freedom to express and to be yourself. What is the border between freedom, sin, and glory to God?
Well, again, I might get in trouble in this crowd, but I think St. Thomas Aquinas is at times underestimated. Even Aquinas said you can have law, but if you can't enforce the law, at certain times you have to say, no, we're not going to have a law on this particular issue. So not everything that's bad we need to have a law about. Thomas admitted this readily. In the same way, for freedom, there are many things that people have the ability to choose to do that we may not like. The law doesn't always need to say this is totally banned or outlawed. But in a Christian civilization, We have the right to not have our freedom abridged, and by freedom I don't simply mean our right to act. Our freedom is abridged when our children are taught that we are bigots and evil because we're standing up for what Christ said is the truth about the family. That undermines our freedom. The language of freedom and rights has been expanded to such a degree, and the left, for lack of a better term, has co-opted freedom to mean I do whatever I want to do. But what we increasingly see is they're the ones that are most rigid in limiting our freedom. We can be very much, okay, you can live the way you want to live, but this isn't good for you, and we're not going to necessarily put everything we think in the law. We're going to allow Orthodox Catholics, Orthodox Jews, we're going to allow you to worship, but once you try and abridge my right for my own children, to my own family, and undermine the values of my country, we're not going to allow it. You know, recently Georgia stopped one of these pride parades, and the patriarch was very forceful, and he said, this is not about freedom. This is about undermining the values of what the Georgian people believe. This undermines us, and what you're doing, parading through the streets half naked, is an attack on our freedom.
Thank you. Ms. Stephanie?
What was the question again? Yeah, being free to express virtue and to express how God is wanting you to incarnate on the earth is a very precious thing that we need to protect. And I would just quote Dr. Dan Mahoney in The Effort to Be Brief, that he said, like secularism or liberalism will emphasize, well, you only have one life to live. And I don't know, he was quoting, or maybe it's his own quote, and he said, I think a truer value is you only have one conscience to protect. And someone asked me the other day, well, you know, you've done all this work and you guys failed with a lot of trying to sue people and to change things and to institute legal protections. And I said, the reason why we do it is for self-dignity and self-respect. That in a moment of darkness, I was free to act and had agency. And so the ability to do that, I would say, is ultimately, we were created with free will because freely given love is our highest end. And we were created from uncreated divine light to give back love to God. That's why you exist, is to love God. So that capacity to be a free agent for the purpose of love or for anything else is our highest end, and the thing that we must protect most diligently.
Yeah, honestly, freedom is something that, it's a complicated issue if you look at it from the Eastern perspective, because, you know, what strikes me is that during the communist times, there's no freedom, basically. But if you look back, I mean, the number of saints is far more relevant than as we can produce today in terms of religion, in terms of people dedicated to religion. But there's no freedom at all. Many people have converted into prison. So if you look at there's fantastic books that has been published about people, Jews and not only Christians, converted. So it strikes me, because I cannot understand this scenario of, you know, finding God or you know, becoming a Christian in a prison, which is a space in which you are not supposed to have freedom, right? So basically, I think it's a more complicated. I don't have an answer to this, because Eastern Europe is different in this respect. Yeah, Solzhenitsyn, you have all this, yeah. The second point, freedom is, well, at a public level, we have to understand that, well, freedom is a very important thing, but we have to understand that Christianity, if they say it in the public space that they have got freedom and they have, you know, their narrative and their story, yeah, but as has already been mentioned, what do they have against Christianity? It's a mythos. It's not the truth. So basically, if they say, okay, everything, it's an interpretation, it's a perspective, well, let's agree with them. And in the public space, yes. But it's your interpretation against my interpretation. So we have to have this type of courage, in particular in the academic world. So if we are all postmodern, let's assume this, I'm a Christian and postmodern, but if you are postmodern, your interpretation is better than my interpretation, right? So we have at least to have the courage to assume this at least, because for us, as a Christian in the public space, it could be an advantage, because there is no neutrality in the public space. We don't have the same position. We always, I'm sorry, I'm a Christian, so may I say something, from, your perspective. No, it's my perspective, your perspective, so many perspectives. So we have to assume that we are part of the conversation. We don't have this type of courage. They define the terms of the conversation. They define the norms. They define what neutrality means. Why is that? So if everything it's a perspective, a narrative, the separation of church and state, it's a narrative, right? So you have to be a little bit more pushy. I mean, you have to go, okay, this entire, fabric of our society is a narrative. But a narrative which somehow left the Christians aside, right? So we have to use their, strategies or narratives in order to go back to the French Revolution and say, you fail because you replace God with, a stupid statue, reason. And so basically, this is how stories goes, And so you have to assume this. We have to tell them, okay, let's talk about narratives. What about your narrative? What about my narrative? What about So we have to assume that we should have more freedom in the public space. On the other side, at the existential level, again, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know, because in Eastern Europe, it's very paradoxical. We go to church, we go to monasteries, we go to the priests, we go to monks. And they say, freedom, come on, I've stayed, they've been put into the prison for 15 years, 17 years, 20 years. So to talk about freedom with them, it's a completely different type of conversation, yeah? But at least at the public level, we have to assume that we have something to put on the table, which is very strong and very powerful. Thank you.
So, yes. So from my point of view, where freedom is perceived as hedonism, there stops the Christian conscience. Father, you want to add something? Only 1 minute, because we have to end. Thank you.
No, I'd just like to quote Father Sophrony Sakharov, from Essex, in connection with what was said with love. Father Sophrony said simply, I love, therefore I am. I love, therefore I am. I think we have here.
Thank you, Father. Thank you, our speakers, Ms. Stephanie Lind, Ms. Brian Brown, and Mr. Dungaciu were here today. Thank you so much. We'll take a short break. Thank you.
Actually, the break will be a bit longer than short. We have now lunch break for 1 hour. So I would like to invite you to go to the place where we had breakfast or the cocktail last evening. I know it's God. And so we have 1 hour lunch break, and after that we'll come back for the last panel. Thank you to all of you.
Bună ziua! Vă invit să luați loc, o să începem într-un minut. Mulțumesc!
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being on time. Not like me, apparently. I'm sorry for being late a few minutes. As you know, today we'll have the last panel. And I think all panels are very important, but this one... It's okay. Yes, okay. All panels are very important, but this one is really a summary of all the panels that we had along the day. Today we have the pleasure to have with us Madam Agnieszka Heshen. Mihai Neamtu. And Peter Coster. Before giving you the floor to three of you, I would like maybe to ask a more private question to introduce you to the audience, but also to take another angle for that panel. And Madam Heshen, my question to you is to understand how you ended up at that university. You are from the Jagiellonan University in Krakow, studying Byzantine culture and music. Can you explain a bit your path and how did you end up in that position and studying that? Yes, if you could.
Thank you. I'm classical philology, and I teach Old Greek, and I teach it some years ago classical Latin. But now I'm working on the Byzantine spirituality and Byzantine literature, especially now. Simeon, the new theologian, and some years ago, I worked on the Gregory of Nazianz. I wrote the book about his poetry, and I translated to Polish all hymns by Synesius of Cyrena. And this is my searches this my job, but all day I spend with my students. I help them to write their diploma workings, and I am lecturer of Byzantine spirituality. We work with my students on the research Byzantine icons, Byzantine texts, Byzantine thoughts, like mentioned here, Gregory of Palamas, like John Klimak, and it's my all work.
Thank you very much. As we all know, Mr. Mihail Neamțu is MP for the National Parliament, but also president of the Mihail Eminescu Institute. And maybe a few of you already know, but the person who came up with this idea of the topic is you, Mihail. And I would like to understand exactly why you thought it was important. What was that issue, that topic? Do you think it's because of all your travel all around the EU and other countries, you felt that we needed to do something like that?
Thank you very much. I'm very grateful because you've accepted the proposition that we've made. And of course, it all starts with a personal experience. I grew up in communist Romania. I was born at the bottom of the Carpathian Mountains in a very, I think, decent city, which was small, but not small enough for the great dreams of a teenager. And I went then to study abroad. And of course, I realized lots of Romanians experience what me and Peter and others experience, namely, you go to the West, but you stay close to the roots. And of course, I realized that in 20-25 years, in the past 20-25 years, the Romanians who constitute right now something like 5 to 6, maybe 7 million people, a community of 7 million people in the West, they stayed close to the church while they've adopted also the good things of the West, including capitalism, basic notions of how the free market functions, respect for the rule of law, and so on and so forth. So this synthesis is something which can be enacted upon in our very lives. And I was thinking for many decades that there's no way we can revive conservatism in Europe without actually going back to the roots of the East, because the East experienced, of course, two forms of resistance, one against Islam, or political Islam to be more specific, the other one against communism. And in particular, countries like Poland, Romania, can bring into the conversation that you are having in Brussels these insights, wonderful insights, which, of course, someone like Professor Daniel Mahoney already collected from the heroes of our youth, Solzhenitsyn, perhaps also Dostoevsky to some extent, and others. So I came to this panel, and I come to you and to any conference of this sort with the hope that we can create in our own lives a beautiful synthesis between East and West.
Thank you very much. And Peter, of course, we work every day together very closely, and it's a pleasure. And I know a bit of your private story, but Mihail mentioned that when he goes to the West, it's important to come back to the East. You went to US, escaping from communism via Italy, and now you are back in Brussels. Maybe one day we'll be back in Romania. How your religion, and if you can say a few words about your belief, were important to all that journey that you made.
Yes, thank you very much, Vitold. Bună ziua, dragi eșeni. Vă îmbrățișez cu multă dragoste și multă afecțiune creștină. Greetings to all of you, citizens of Iași. I embrace you with a great deal of Christian affection. Dar având în vedere faptul că această conferință în limba engleză, va trebui să vorbesc în limba engleză. So, given the fact that this conference is being held in English mostly, I will have to address to you in English. About a few things about myself. I was born and raised in Romania in the Bihor, Crișana County. And at the age of 21, many years ago, I fled communism. And I resettled in the United States as a refugee in the great state of Texas, where I gained my education. I became an attorney. I studied politics. I studied international politics. I studied economics. I studied journalism. I studied diplomacy, and eventually obtained a degree in law. and I have practiced law in the United States for the last 36 years almost. And of course, some of you know me from my engagements in Romanian politics and the constitutional amendments that we tried to pass in 2006 and 2018 to protect marriage between a man and a woman in Romania. And then last year, about a year ago, I had the honor of being invited to work for this great foundation, New Direction, and become a member of a great, outstanding team, starting with Witold de Chevily. We affectionately call him the boss, but he does not act like a boss. Great, intelligent young man, a family man, and then my two outstanding friends in the back, Robert Tyler and Michael Busicoli from Italy. We form an exceptionally great team, and so this is one of those conferences that we work on just about once a month all over Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So I wanted to take these few minutes to make sure that we all know from where our speakers will be speaking. I think it's very important to not have a detached speech, but also to understand the origin and the path of each speaker. That's very important, at least to me. And now, Peter and Mihaela, I hope you will agree with me that I will give the floor to Madame Eschen for her speech. If you could please stick to 10 minutes each. If it's possible, then we can have some debate. I would really enjoy that.
Dear guests, dear organizers, I thank you very much for your invitation. I'm the first time in Romania, and I like it here very much. I'm a classical philology, and my perspective is so philological and historical. My perspective on the European legacy and heritage. The first point, my speech, there is a historical background. What is Byzantium? Byzantium is the epoch which conserved and traded the ancient heritage, and it's a very important thing. Byzantine monks and philosophers, when escaped from Constantinople, in 1453, were taking with them many manuscripts, and next they stayed in Italy and become the teachers on European humanists, like Nicolaus Copernicus, for example, from my country. After the fall of Constantinople, a lot of Greek books were started to be printed. The ancient and early Christian writers were recognized. People learned about them. In opinion of some scholars, for example, Sylvan Guggenheim, Aristotle was already recognized by West monks in 11th century via Sicilian and South Italy Greeks, not through the Arabs. At least some of his writings, especially writings about, for example, Physica. Just as Corpus Hippocrateum, the medieval medicine owes a lot Byzantine scholars. And the next point, its issue is Cyril and Methodius' mission. That moment when mutual and reciprocal relations started. Relations in the West and East. Their activity among Slavonic peoples is one from the first of connection. Old Church Slavonic language allowed to recognize Christian heritage, Christian Greek heritage. What did Byzantium give to West Europe? The first, very beautiful art. Byzantine painting, or icons of course, are inspiration to many European painters, and Romanic architecture, for example, has some similarities to late antiquity and Byzantine building. Rotundy churches on the Greek crossplane, external appearance outside, without decoration, inside, longer figure of angel, colors of frescoes. The next inspiration is music. Some concepts of Renaissance music, for example, in so-called the nice school, can be taken from Byzantine church hymns. But at first of all, spirituality. Mystical way to theosis, it is hesychasm, asceticism, and prayer of heart. It's very interesting mode to reach spiritual life. John Climacus, also known as John of the Ladder, the author of the Ladder of Divine Ascent, living in 6th century, teaches us how we can ascend the sanctity. His precise definitions of particular vice and virtues are actually today and should be kind of manual in our internal way of self-education. At last, but not least, literature. I come from Poland. I'm lecturer of Byzantine literature in Krakow, and I ask my students always what they know about Byzantine writers, text, others, and I hear the answer, nothing. Absolvents of secondary schools and bachelor's degree students don't know anything about Byzantine literature. So I think that, for example, Byzantine novels like Rodante and Docicles by Theodor Prodromos, Drusilla and Charicles by Niketas Eugenianos. Next, hymnography by Simeon the New Theologian, drama Christos Paschon should be known. These books should be included in the school reading list. The works by Simeon the Theologian, especially hymns, are an anticipation of the way of expressing mystical experience, independent of civilizational or dogmatic differences, and a kind of proof of this timeless and cross-cultural tendency can be found in several fragments of the poetry of John of the Cross, living in the 16th century. Also a mystic, geographically and opacally distant from the Byzantine monk. The beauty of Contagions by Romanos the Melodist does not be known at all. I think that this work would be the lessons of faith and logical persuasion in the religious question for contemporary Christians. The church father, like Clement of Alexandria, Gregory of Nazianz, Basil the Great, should be read now. Their precise expression of thoughts, their care of special Christian terminology are a role model for us. Next question are the points in time, Byzantium, Baroque, contemporary. The 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries in Poland, especially in the Kingdom of Poland and Lithuania, in this time the connection inter West and East churches were close and friend. We have a lot of evidence and traces of interconnections. Some saints were common in the Orthodox churches, were built, for example, side altars, like in Catholic churches. I would like to say about reception Byzantine hymnography in Poland in the 16th, 17th centuries. For example, Akathis hymn by Simeon of Połock, Baroque poet, wrote Orthodox church hymn in Polish language. He used Polish rhythmical patterns in their Akathist. It can be say that the connection were very close and important. Mutual and reciprocal relations are very strong. We must remember about our history and cultural and religious circles, Greek, Byzantine, and Slavonic Orthodox and West Catholic. The East may be the example and pattern of attachment to the faith and tradition. The tradition without changes, tradition with rich literature, writings, and hymnography. Despite the civilizational differences between Byzantium and West Europe, the symbols of theological faith and the convergence of literary motifs were determined by common sources, by ancient Christian roots, such as Greek philosophy, the father of the church, and interpretation of Holy Scriptures. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Eschen, for your presentation. Please, if you can join me. Yes, perfect. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Neamtu. I think that Professor Eschen set up very high standards by sticking to the 10 minutes. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. So let's begin this afternoon with a question. When was the last time you felt that a building surrounding you was a reflection of the goodness of the creation of God? When did you feel that that building, that particular building was really beautiful, not comfortable, not just efficiently made, but good, ordered, luminous, proportioned to the body, to your body and to your soul? Now, if the answer does not come quickly, we and you have located the wound this essay or this talk will mean to examine together. Now, we are in Iași. As you exit this hotel, you will see a huge contrast, as I said, between the realist, socialist architecture of the other hotel and the classical tradition which our ancestors built here in the 19th century. And as we will go closer to the Metropolia, closer to the Three Hierarchs Church, we will notice precisely how this wound has inflicted not just this city, but this entire world, Eastern Europe, and probably the West too. And the wound has a name. It's called ugliness. And ugliness, ladies and gentlemen, is not an accident. It is a physiological event. Cortisol, the stress hormone, rises measurably in the modern built environment. The blank facade, the curtain wall that mirrors its surrounding with the inscrutability of a face that has forgotten how to see, the housing block, of course, scaled for an ideology about persons rather than for persons themselves. I speak of the socialism which Solzhenitsyn experienced. So the body, through its own reaction, knows what the planning committee, the central planning committee, denied in those days. And why do we say that? It's because not only the humans respond to it, the birds too respond to this wound called ugliness. Ornithologists have noticed that birds require the layered, textured, hierarchically rich form that genuine beauty always provides. They leave our cities, I mean the birds, when the city has been fully rationalized. That's why I think St. Francis of Assisi would have never chosen Manhattan as a destination or a residence for his monastery, St. Clara too. And I mentioned St. Clara because the mothers are also fleeing these cities. Ask a mother, perhaps from Manhattan, where she takes her young child. And the answer follows a very consistent grammar. Not there, not the windswept plaza between the glass towers, not the residential corridor that echoes with a design never intended for her and for her children. She, the mother, goes to the Old Town, like we are going to the Old Town in a few minutes, where the proportioned street, the sheltered square, the neighborhood whose buildings have faces. So this is a very important point I'm trying to make. The machines took over the city, and what we are left with is with this spectacle of ugliness. And this ugliness, ladies and gentlemen, is not, as I said, accidental. It is the material expression of a philosophy which was very much rejected by the Christian theological tradition called Gnosticism. In its ancient form, the Gnostic impulse despised matter. The physical world was not the good creation of a good God, but a prison for the divine spark trapped within. So beauty, from this perspective, is irrelevant or maybe even dangerous. A lure that tightens the soul's attachment to its cage. Of course, in modernity, the planners especially the socialist planners, used a different vocabulary. But the logic is identical. They see, especially the progressive liberals these days, any form, any inherited form as an ideological construction, making power, superstitions of a pre-rational age to be cleared by scientific methods. So, ladies and gentlemen, I believe we have very vivid examples of this ugliness, of course, suffocating us, especially in Europe. Just look at the European Parliament in Strasbourg, completed in 1999 at a cost of 600 million euros. It was designed to house the supreme democratic institution of a continent that gave the world the Parthenon in Greece and, of course, the Gothic cathedrals of Chartres and perhaps Notre Dame. So what the architects in Strasbourg delivered was a structure that manages to evoke to this day simultaneously a nuclear cooling tower and an unfinished airport terminal, and the headquarters perhaps of a moderately successful stationery company. The central drum, a vast cylinder of glass and steel, apparently inspired by the unfinished Tower of Babel, dominates a riverfront that once aspired to civic dignity. Why is that? Why do we still produce with so much money so little beauty? The ugliness of the modern city, ladies and gentlemen, is not a failure in or of imagination. It is a success of a certain type of ideology. And we have this ideology, as I said, being dominant today because we forgot something fundamental about what the East taught us, namely that beauty is not merely an attribute of God, but that beauty is God. And this comes, very evidently in the writings of a saint that I think you love very much, called Dionysius the Areopagite, who says that, as I said, God's very self-communication is beauty, that the beauty of God is an overflow of God's life into creation, and of course any type of beauty that we encounter is participating in the divine beauty. This is the metaphysical statement which the East is making, and I think which the West could perhaps lend its ears to. So what is the ugliness surrounding us doing? It's perhaps also trying to sell us a few lies about who we are. While beauty is the image of God in Christ, and of course in Christ we see, as Vlad Mureșan nicely put it, the glorified form sanctifying the earthly matter, the infinite being united to the finite, while Christ is the perfect image of the Godhead, as St. Paul once put it, he is the icon tu theou, tu aoratu, of the invisible God. If that's the case, and if we recognize Christ as the perfect image of a beautiful God, then we have to understand that by losing that truth, that metaphysical truth, we've lost, of course, or also our access to beautiful architecture. And of course, I don't believe it's by chance that an entire civilization, a country that today is being despised, but an interesting leader such as Prince Vladimir in 1988, I hope Daniel Mahoney will like this, sent his emissaries to Constantinople in order to contemplate that beauty. And they came back with this strong impression that the divine light and the divine beauty, or the beauty of the divine, is manifested fully in the divine liturgy of Hagia Sophia. And because of this aesthetic theological argument, Prince Vladimir embraced the Eastern Orthodox Church, or the Creed of the East. And why is that? Because Hagia Sophia is the supreme architectural argument for the transparency of matter to the divine. The dome literally dematerializes. 40 windows ring its base, admitting light from every direction simultaneously, so that the dome does not rest on its support. It dissolves into the light it receives. So that's what the emissaries of Prince Vladimir said. They saw the dome suspended from heaven by a golden chain. That's the image they brought to Vladimir. And of course, he was persuaded and he became a Christian. He was a pagan, I'm told, drinking too much. Now, why do I think the West was paying attention to this in the past, but not anymore? Because of Florence, because of Venice, because of San Marco, and so many other beautiful cathedrals which the Westerners build. And from this point of view, ex Oriente Lux is not a motto. It is a description of how the Western civilization survived its own catastrophes. I know that I need to come to a close. There's this saying that in the first 10 minutes of a speech, you set ideas in motion, but if the speech is bad, then you set the feet in motion. I'm hoping that's not going to take place, happen anytime soon. So, ladies and gentlemen, I believe we need to finish with these axioms of beauty. The 6 propositions that I'm putting forward for a new conservative manifesto, trying to win the hearts of the future generations. First of all, beauty is an attribute of God, not a human preference. To recognize beauty is to know something real. The building that achieves this beauty tells the truth about the nature of things. Ugliness is not an accident, it's a theological statement, the material assertion that matter has no inherent dignity. God, also a very important theological, I would say, statement, which is derived from the truth of incarnation. God chose human scale. The city that refuses this human scale refuses the incarnation. Beautiful churches also, here in Iași, teach us how to build beautiful secular buildings. The mother with the child is actually the last and true honest judge of the city. Where she goes freely, the city is working. Where she avoids, the city has chosen its machines over its person. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's build beautiful buildings, beautiful cities, beautiful neighborhoods, beautiful families, beautiful institutions, because the beautiful will then and only then address its inhabitants. The ugly building ignores us. The beauty is saving us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michal, for your very, very good speech. And actually, it makes a perfect link with our previous event that we had in Firenze last week on beauty and digital renaissance. So I'm quite happy that also our events are plugging into each other. And also, I take from your speech that communism and leftist liberalism are not delivering beauty in our life. And I think that is also this fight that we have against neo-Marxists, and we can see it every day. So thank you for also underlining that. Now I would like to give the floor to my colleague, my friend Peter Coster. The floor is yours, and I know you will stick to 10 minutes because we see each other on Monday, so I will not repeat myself.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Witold. And please do raise your hand when I hit 10. But hold on one second. Let me pull out my phone and put it right here in front of me. It's like just like when you go to court in Houston, Texas, and the judge will tell you you've got 5 minutes. And then when you hit minute 4.5, the judge says you've got 30 seconds left. Finish up. So, all right. I'll be talking, well, let me start this way. I enjoyed very much the presentations that were made today, and I saw a sort of a straight line as far as personalities are concerned between the first person that who spoke here and hopefully me, and that is a focus on certain aspects, certain personalities that the East has given to humanity, history, and the West as well. And I enjoyed very much the presentation which Dan, Mr. Mahoney, made. He stressed very much the life and thinking of Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And I'm going to close out this my presentation by talking about another person of historical proportions that is not talked that much about, but in my line of business, which is the law, jurisprudence, he has left a very huge imprint, and that is Emperor Justinian. Emperor Justinian obviously comes from the East, And I want, of course, out of the many, many things that we can talk about as far as Emperor Justinian is concerned, I want to talk about a very important principle which is important to you, to me, and it has been important to Europe and civilization for 2,000 plus years, and that is the rule of law. Obviously, to us as Christians, we know that the rule of law is not a Christian invention. We find that in the Holy Scriptures. We find that in the Ten Commandments, for instance. We find that repeated in the Old Testament over and over again, that there are rules in society and you've got to abide by those rules. And when you do not abide by those rules, there are consequences, and consequences can be severe. At the other end of the Mediterranean world at about the same time, another civilization developed, and that was the Roman civilization. And the Romans also developed this notion of the republic, the notion of the law, jurisprudence, and the notion of the rule of law, that everybody is below the law, the society has to be ruled by rules, and if there are violations of the rules of the laws, there are going to be consequences. What I want to point out to you, however, is that there was a period in time when this very important doctrine, the rule of law, was threatened with extinction. And that was when the western half of the Roman Empire collapsed in 476, as all of us know. And it was what we call the Dark Ages, and it was a time when, ancestors sort of despaired. Christianity was on the way out, it seemed. But then light was in and hope was in the east. God raised this great man of God, I believe, and his name was Emperor Justinian, and we are going to focus on his life very briefly. Justinian lived a long life. He lived to be 83 years old, and he had a long reign, 38 years. And during this long life and long reign, he was able to accomplish a great deal of things. Of course, we don't have the time nor the interest of going into all of the details. One of the things that he, of course, established or did was to expand the borders of the Roman Empire. And in doing so, he included in the Byzantine or Eastern Roman Empire millions upon millions of people and a whole bunch of territory. And so he was faced with this very important issue. I've got to recreate or create a civil structure, an administrative state, all the way from Syria and beyond, all the way to Rome, all the way to Italy, all the way to southern Spain, and so on and so forth. And so to Justinian and his people, developing a sound legal system was very, very important. And of course, all of us know from history that what Justinian and his jurists did was they engaged in they created this wonderful collection of what we in law call the rescripts. They went through a whole bunch of old Roman edicts and senatorial speeches and senate decrees and laws. Move on and try to put this concept in context, in today's context. But before I do so, I want to stress three aspects of the Justinian Code that I think are very, very well known to us, or most of us, and I want to rephrase them here today because they are important legal maxims which this emperor wanted to implement in the minds and hearts of the citizens of his empire. In preparation for my presentation, I started reading the Justinian Code, and I realized it's a huge, huge book. But I think, if I'm not wrong, in the second or the third verse, the jurists of those days examined or proposed three legal maxims which have stayed with us all the way to today. The first one is live honestly, the second one is harm no one, And the third one is give every man his due, which obviously comes right out of the book of Romans, where Apostle Paul says, give honor where honor is due. So all of these principles somehow are based upon our Judeo-Christian faith and heritage. So what I want to emphasize in my second half of my presentation is this notion that the law is very important, the rule of law. For hundreds of years in the West, this notion was almost on its way out. And so only in the 12th or 13th century, if I'm not wrong, the law school in the great Italian city of Bologna readopted these principles and the notion of the rule of law, and they began teaching students about the rule of law and so on and so forth. And this is how we ended up today in Europe, believing and having our systems, laws, jurisprudence built around this notion of the rule of law. What is the rule of law? The rule of law is reverence for the law, meaning you have respect for the law. Respect for the law has to be ingrained in our hearts, in our minds, and has to be preached everywhere and from every public institution, from every public place where we can speak. And I want to focus for about 2 minutes because I know my time is short. I want to focus on something which I have discovered only about 3 or 4 months ago, a wonderful speech given by Abraham Lincoln, excuse me, back in January of 1838. He was speaking to the high school kids in Chicago, Illinois, and he made a passionate presentation of why the rule of law was important for the United States, and he was very frank. It's a long speech. I'm going to read to you a couple of excerpts indicating why it was so important for the United States. If the United States wanted to survive for another 50 years or 500 years, it was very important for the United States to remain committed to the rule of law. And he opens up his presentation by pointing out that in the United States back in those days, there's a lot of lawlessness. People were being lynched, you know, for various reasons, horse thieves and cattle rustlers and so on and so forth. And so he comes up with this notion, folks, we cannot have a stable republic in the United States if you are going to take justice in our own hands. We've got to develop rule of law, respect for the law, because otherwise we are going to end up with a political collapse. This is what he says. If the laws be continually despised and disregarded, if the rights of the people to be secure in their persons and in their property are held by no better tenure than the caprice of a mob, the alienation of the affections from the government is the natural consequence. In other words, what he says here is, if we don't abide by the law, if we have no respect for the law, political collapse is going to happen. And then this is what he says. The question then is this: how shall we fortify against political collapse? And then he presents the answer. And that is reverence for the law. I'm going to read to you what he says. Let reverence for the laws of the United States be breathed by every mother into their children. Let reverence for the law be preached from the pulpit, proclaimed in legislative halls, and enforced in the courts of justice. And in short, let reverence for the law become the political religion of our nation. Heavy words, extremely important for those days and today. And then he says, and let the old man and the young, the rich and the poor, the grave and the happy, of all sexes and tongues and colors and conditions, sacrifice unceasingly upon the altars of this political religion, which is respect for the law. And let me conclude my presentation by putting these comments and these principles in today's context. And I'm going to make reference here to Romania first and foremost, and then we'll extrapolate the same principle to the whole of Europe and then the whole West. Of course, all of you know what happened in Romania back in December of 2024. I was hurt because I voted as well. You were hurt because you voted as well. And so the Constitutional Court of Romania, of course you know that, violated, in my opinion, the basic rule of law. The law is the law. They were appointed in the highest function in the land to respect the law and to uphold the law. And what did they do? They invalidated valid elections in Romania. I was hurt and you're hurt. They broke the ice because once they did so, that had a snowball effect throughout Europe and in other countries in the world. So, the problem nowadays is that courts, the guardians of democracy, of the rule of law, of this political religion that Abraham Lincoln was talking about, the courts of law have become the #1 enemies of the rule of law. I saw in one of the books that I have looked at today, and that was, I think, Senator DeLo's book that he translated, there is a paragraph out of Judge Bork, a great jurist in the United States, conservative. I urge you, you young scholars interested in jurisprudence, read his book. And then I also remember a very interesting, forceful, direct comment made by Justice Scalia when the United States recognized gay marriage in the United States 11 years ago in June. He said, this court, the Supreme Court of the United States, is the main enemy of democracy in the United States. And so I'm going to end on this note. We are conservative. We believe in conservative principles. Let's emphasize over and over again, from the pulpit, from the altar, from our institutions, in our conferences, the importance of abiding by the law and the rule of law. Because times are tough. What I see on the horizon, and maybe these are documents which most of you do not read, but unfortunately I have an interest in reading them. There is now this new thing on the horizon, and that is the left, the progressives are trying to redefine the whole concept of the rule of law. #1. #2, they are trying to redefine the whole concept of democracy, what democracy is all about. And I want to end up with this informative note, and I think that my colleague Witold can talk more about this. If I correctly remember, Witold, about 4 or 5 or 6 months ago, I think that we commissioned a report that was written by some French jurists on the rule of law. It's in French. At some point, I think that maybe you can make a brief presentation of that document. I think that at some point, that document is going to be posted on our website. Continue to watch our website, read our website, newdirection.com, and you'll find more info there. That concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Peter, for your very good speech. I'm happy that we had three different perspectives on the topic. Yes, more cultural, beauty, but also politics and justice. So I think that it's a very good start. Before I will ask my question, maybe you have some comments on the speech from each other?
I expected him to mention Theodora, because he spoke about Justinian so eloquently, and also Hagia Sophia.
Yes. Yes, thank you very much, Theodora. In fact, last night when I spoke with Stephanie, I told Stephanie I was going to talk about not Theodora. I was going to talk about Emperor Justinian today. She stopped me. She said, Theodora as well. I said, yeah, Theodora as well. Sorry, I forgot to mention her, but thank you very much for bringing. And by the way, Theodora in Greek, translated in Romanian, means lover of God. Beautiful name. Gift of God. I apologize. My nephew's name is Theodore, and I thought they told me it means love of God. It's a gift of God.
So coming back to our topic debate, and coming back to the main issue of the panel, Michal, I would like to ask maybe a more political question. In our Western countries, at least half for me, because I'm half Polish, half Belgium, we saw that over the centuries, we had a big fight between the political power and the spiritual power, yes? And we have now a big divide in our societies, and maybe this divide is actually too radical in my sense. But can you please explain a bit how do you see this tension in the Orthodox world regarding the political power? If you see the same tension, the same divide, and because for instance, if I think about, let's say it's maybe a bad example, but why I'm asking the question, in Russia, yes, we see that the situation, it's really different. And so if you could maybe comment on that.
Yes. Unfortunately, today in the Orthodox world, we see a rift, or we see a big divide between Constantinople and Moscow. And to some extent, it's because of the war of Russia against Ukraine, that the Russian Orthodox Church was put under pressure to accept the political dictates of Kremlin. And that gives you the impression, I don't know much about this, but there is little freedom of theological conversation inside the Russian Orthodox Church right now. I know of Andrei Kurayev, for instance, a theologian who was almost banned because he expressed critical views about the leadership of the Russian Federation. And to be very honest with you, while I can criticize, and I would do it freely, what's going on in Russia, I'm also disappointed with what's going on in Ukraine, because we see a similar process, a high politicization of the religious affairs, of the religious life, which is again being put into the service of sometimes sheer propaganda in favor of the current president. And I think it's not the job of the state, of any state, to tell, you know, honest believers what should they think about such matters. Now, thankfully, in Romania, in places like, I believe, Serbia, Greece, talking about the Orthodox Church, there is more freedom. Not to mention that in, of course, America and other parts of the West, France, Switzerland, the Orthodox churches are under no pressure to say things politically one way or the other. So I still believe where there is political freedom, there's also more religious freedom. And that's why I am in favor of all the Western structures, but not in a perverted version or in a perverted manner like we heard from Peter. Otherwise, in terms of how to define freedom, not just politically, but in general, one thing that came to my mind, because this was discussed in the previous panel too, you are not only free when you choose, you are free when you choose well. And in order to choose well, and that's an act of participation in the higher good, you need to be informed about what is good and what is bad. And that's need the tradition. And I think the Orthodox are very good here in terms of countering the excesses of atomism and individualism of the West.
If I may add, we were together in Toulouse for the event on Aquinas, and I remember well that one of the sentences was, choosing is actually becoming free, and that's what you said now. Professor Eschen, if I can come back to your presentation and to the topic also of culture, you also underlined the link with orthodoxy and the time and tradition, and so I have maybe a question in two levels. The first one, do you think that then Orthodox Church and religion can save the West? Because we can see that in our civilization in the West, at least in Belgium, France, we have a big decline of religion. People are going less and less to church, even though I see some articles sometimes in the US that young people are going back to church, and I'm very happy to read those articles, but in Belgium, believe me, it's not the case. Do you think so the Orthodox culture can save the West? And also, do you think that this Orthodox Church, who is a bit more decentralized than the Catholic one, gave more freedom to the artist in order to develop the beauty that you mentioned?
Thank you. It's said that Orthodox Church and Byzantine writers are known in West, and because the Orthodox Church and Byzantine writers like mentioned by me, Romanos, the Melodis, the Simeon, the new theologian, are as important as the similar West writers. For example, Shakespeare, maybe, I think. And Shakespeare is known to all people, but Romanos the Melodist or Simeon the theologian, not. It's very sad, but I think that it's problem in education, and we must to work on the education. The young people have to learn Latin, ancient Greek, and have to read not only West artists, West authors, but to East writers, East philosophers, East thinkers.
But Agnieszka, you should also say Syrian, not just Greek. Not just ancient Greek, but also we should learn Syrian. Or Syriac, I'm sorry, Syriac. To study Ephraim.
I don't understand. No. I think that
Ephraim wrote in Syria.
Yes, Ephraim comes from Syria. From Syria, yes, of course. I read Ephraim, but only in translations, of course, to Polish. We have many translations of Ephraim. It's very beautiful poetry. Yes, I work on the Ephraim and Romanos hymnography, but I think that Syriac language is too difficult for European people. It's only for choosing. But Latin and ancient Greek is possible, of course. It's basic of our culture, of course. But we have translations, for example, like we have translation Holy Scripture. Thank you.
Thank you. So now I would like to turn to Peter, and I would like to have your opinion, and if you think that Orthodox have a different definition of Western civilization that maybe people have in US or in Belgium. For full disclosure, of course, you are from Romania, but you are not Orthodox yourself, so maybe you have a different point of view and you are a bit more neutral on the question, if you can maybe answer to that question.
Yes, thank you very much, Witold. One of the things that I really liked about one of the things that I really liked about this conference is that we have been able to summon and bring together the faithful, conservative faithful from all three major branches of Christianity. We have here wonderful Catholic friends and Orthodox brothers and sisters. I myself am Protestant of the evangelical branch. And so I also want to point out that in Iași you do have a fairly vibrant Catholic community. In case our foreign guests do not know that, we do have a fairly sizable Catholic population in Iași as well. But with respect to the evangelical faith, which I share along with some others in this room, we are also very concerned about what's going on in society. And in fact, I have listened very closely to my good friend and brother in Christ, in a sense, Mario. I was telling him the respect that we evangelicals have for the Catholic people, the Catholic faithful, because they have spent a lot of time in the last 2,000 years thinking about principles of law, principles of political principles, economic principles, justice in society, and so on and so forth, much more than the much newer evangelical faith. And then he emphasized how he was in a sense impressed by the fact that evangelicals seem to be more passionate and come out in public when it comes to values, when it comes to respect for fundamental human rights and values. So in our sphere, if you will, in the evangelical sphere, unlike the Orthodox world or the Catholic world, you do not find a large number of intellectuals that have international recognition. There are some, but what we have on our side is this exuberance and this passion that Mario was talking about. We are first to fight, we are first to raise our fists, and it's wonderful to cooperate with everybody, with everyone on these fundamental aspects of civilization.
Thank you, Peter. I see a question, yes, Professor. As you were our keynote speakers, I will make an exception, of course, and I will give you the mic for your question. No, I'm not planning. I think that we are coming to an end, and I know that we have other items, but we cannot miss your question.
I was just going to add that I think sometimes when people talk about church-state relations in contemporary Russia, we hear a bit of a caricature. Now, it's always characterized as Caesaro-papism, and it's certainly the case since the outbreak of the war in 2022 that the Patriarch and the official church have sacralized and endorsed Russia's struggle in a sort of unqualified way. But I would just like to add that the church often takes independent initiatives. There are 2,000 new martyrs who have been canonized by the Orthodox Church, victims of communism, and much of the practical pastoral activity of the church is geared toward honoring them. That's a completely independent initiative of the Orthodox Church, ahead of the Russian state. And the Orthodox Church has also made efforts in the last 15 years to articulate an Orthodox social doctrine, that is along the lines of Catholic social teaching, that makes the church's teaching less numinous, in some abstract way, and more concrete about the struggles of modern society. And one final word, none of you mentioned him, but I had the misfortune of listening to the Patriarch of Constantinople at the Templeton Prize event in New York a year or two ago. And I mean, he just sounded like a humanitarian NGO leader. His views on environmentalism were as apocalyptic as Al Gore. There was very little specific Orthodox or Catholic, or Christian theological content at all. So that's another Orthodox model. Bartholomew, clearly, like Pope Francis, wants to, as Jacques Maritain warned the Catholic Church in the 60s, kneel before the world, the progressivist assumptions of the contemporary world. So I'd be interested if anyone had any comment on that, because I think Mihai's right about the mirror image mistakes of the Ukrainian and Russian religious authorities. But Bartholomew seems to provide a model of Orthodox engagement with the world that has dangers of its own.
Thank you. If someone would like... Mihail, you would like to answer? Yes, please. Of course.
Of course, I agree with you 100%. I did not mean to caricature anybody, not the church with 140 million believers. That's not my field of expertise. I was just saying there is political pressure sometimes being felt by ordinary priests, and sometimes I communicate with such ordinary priests, and they told me especially in the last 4 years, they were not allowed always to express themselves. But of course, I see the woke ideology kicking in, and a certain type of liberal Christianity being professed by theologians from Fordham University. And of course, they're very close to Bartholomew. So our church, like any other church in the West, is struggling. You have traditionalists on the one hand, you have liberal Christians on the other hand, progressive theologians, and this battle which is now taking place inside the church is a pure reflection, an obvious reflection of the battle which is happening in our culture too. So this will be the struggle of our age. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mihail, for your answer. I think it's also a link a bit to the question that we can face sometimes in our political family, that do we need a conservative pope or we just need a good pope? And I think that's that's also a question that I myself asking quite often. Having said that, I would like to say thank you to the three speakers. Thank you very much for being with us today. I think we can now. It was a pleasure moderating that panel, I have to say. Now we will have our keynote speakers. I don't know if, Michal, you would like maybe to introduce our last keynote speakers, Mr. Kasser, because I think you are more entitled to introduce him. Thank you, Madam Eschen and Peter, for your good comments. Just few technical comments. After the last keynote speech, we will end the program as we are running a bit late. We are then leaving for the visit of the cathedral. As you know, we discussed beauty quite a lot today, but also we would like to see beauty in action. So if you would like to join us for the visit at 4:30, we are leaving from the hotel. And
I shall introduce right now, ladies and gentlemen, our last speaker, Stefan Cârstea. And I'm particularly pleased because many of you know that there is this conversation between science and faith in the West. The Templeton Foundation tried to host such debates. And of course, some of you heard about people such as John Lennox, for instance, the great mathematician and Christian apologist from, I would say, the West, an Anglican who is taking the gospel seriously, something you don't find so often these days. Now, it's not easy to find Eastern Orthodox theologians able to grasp all the concepts of quantum mechanics and mathematics, but we have an exception. And it's an exceptional exception, so to speak, because he studied in Bucharest, he studied, of course, in Tokyo, he studied in Sorbonne, and he studied things that 99% perhaps of the audience could not properly understand because they are very, very highly sophisticated concepts. But he, Stefan Cârstea, Dr. Stefan Cârstea, created a beautiful, I would say, platform for conversations between theologians and scientists. And I think you are leading the way, and I want to thank you especially for your last book on transhumanism and ways in which, of course, scientists who are not informed by the gospel, who are not shaped by the ethos of the Christian church, unfortunately begin to worship power instead of loving the truth. And I'm looking forward to listening to Stefan Cârstea. Please, a round of applause for our last guest. Thank you.
Of this conference, of this marvelous conference, and that's why I want to thank very much to Mihai for inviting me here. I think I'm the only one which are coming from the natural science because I'm a mathematical physicist, and I'm really honored to give you some ideas about what means natural contemplation in Byzantine lore, in Byzantine culture, and how this natural contemplation can be seen today in modern science. What I'm going to say today is related to the so-called second step in the purification, not in the purification, in the ascending toward knowledge of God, namely the natural contemplation, which after the purification from passions, ascending toward knowledge of God, is extremely important and represent a kind of compulsory step, because God created the universe not in vain. Okay. On the other hand, for me, as a mathematical physicist, it's extremely valuable since it provides a way to see the very foundation of the physical world. Probably not a way, probably the way to see the very foundation of the physical world, which cannot be described by pure mathematical or experimental language. But in order to have a clearer understanding of what I'm going to say, let me remind you some main concepts of biblical cosmology. You know, Holy Fathers say that God created the whole world out of nothing, starting from the so-called logoi of things, reason of things, by the so-called plasticization, which maybe is not a very good word. It was used by Father Dumitru Stăniloae in his books. I would say embodiment or incarnation, or, well, maybe embodiment is a better word. And this embodiment is used using his uncreated energies. What are the logoi of things? It is a very deep concept and is mainly related to the thoughts of God with respect to an object or thing, no matter is visible or intelligible. What is important is that the logoi cannot change. They are eternal. These logoi all belong to the divine logos, which is of course the Jesus Christ. According to St. Maximus the Confessor, logoi were elaborated in a pre-time of creation. This is very important. So in a sense, the logos of time was somehow the first one which appeared after this, after the existence of the logo in the mind of God, let's say. After the embodiment of the logoi, we have the so-called mode of activation of this logoi called tropoi or tropos, which means mode of activation. And what is important is that these tropos are not eternal. They can change. The fall of humanity, the fall of Adam, changed the tropos, but not the logoi. And this is exactly the way where the death and the entropic aspect of the nature appeared. This was a catastrophic thing for the nature, I mean the fall of Adam. And let me quote from Saint Simeon, the New Theologian, what happened after the fall of Adam. He said this: the sun refused to shine, the moon refused to show up, the stars refused to twinkle, the springs declined to gush, rivers declined to follow, the air collapsed in itself to stop the man to breathe. Beasts and animals, seeing the man naked of his glory, despised him, and all were enraged against him. The sky moved to fall on the man, and the earth refused to bear him. So it was a catastrophic thing. And this catastrophic thing provoked a change of the nature, a change of law of the nature. And what we have here, the law of physics, chemistry, biology, the whole Darwinian evolution of the biological world appeared after this fall of Adam. So in a sense, it's pointless to ask ourselves in a scientific way what was the beginning of the universe, what was the Big Bang. It doesn't work. Okay. Now, in order to see exactly what means creation out of nothing and what means embodiment, let me give you some very simple examples. In quantum physics, we have the so-called vacuum fluctuations. The vacuum, the nothingness, has zero energy. But in quantum mechanics, you cannot have a specific value of the energy. The energy fluctuates. If the energy fluctuates, some particles are provoked. And they are popping up some particles, but are virtual particles, which again, they are annihilated and become the vacuum. So from nothing to something, and then from something to nothing. It's the same thing as in philosophy. In logic of Hegel, we have nothing and being merging into each other into becoming. You know, it's the same thing. This is in logic of Hegel, but for Hegel, logic means the structure of reality. Is something really important. Also, in quantum system, we have the so-called description by superposition of state. Not only one state, one material point with some properties. We have a superposition, a multiplication of states. But when we do try a measurement, then all the states are collapsing into only one. This is an embodiment, if you want, of quantum states. Also, Constantin Noica said in his 27 Stairs of the Reality that his ontological view can be enlarged using the concept of the wave, because the wave described the motion of the motion, described the being through becoming, and so on. And he said that a packet of waves can produce, let's say, a self-focusing, giving rise to incarnation, to embodiment. From these examples, one can easily see that logoi and their dynamics represent a fundamental fact in knowledge of creation. Moreover, they lead to a partial knowledge of God himself. This means that as Judaic law is a pedagogue leading to the law of Christ, the knowledge of logoi of creation is a pedagogue leading to the knowledge of God. Of course, this knowledge is just a partial one. In a sacramental language of Eucharist, the body of Christ is related to the logoi of visible things, and the blood of Christ is related to the logoi of intelligible things. And all these logoi are rays of the divine logos on which one can ascend to the partial knowledge of God. So in a sense, the creation is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. We can use it toward the God, or we can use it to fall into the hell. But natural contemplation or knowledge of logoi is not a discursive way of knowing. It is a symbolic knowledge. The intrinsic structure of the created world is a symbolic one. It is a symbol of divine transcendency. The symbolic approach sees everywhere signs and symbols of the spiritual world. And this can be done only in the light of the Holy Spirit. The human mind in this light sees both the objective and subjective reality as symbolic realities, because nature is no longer ultimate reality. It is a window towards something spiritual. Myself is not the ultimate reality of me, because I see the Jesus Christ in me because I'm a baptized person. And, you know, when you're baptized, the Jesus Christ lives in yourself. So, symbolic realities cannot be reduced to fixed concepts and rigid categories. Accordingly, through symbol and illumination, the logoi are revealed and disclosed. But the natural question appears: what is the role of discursive, rational thinking? Can it be used to reveal the logoi? The scholastic says that is the only way. However, the Holy Fathers underlines that the symbolic aspect of the world makes impossible the knowledge of logoi by discursive approach. The categories of rationality applies only to finite things. They define and put limits. In science, we have causal relations and logical chains. In the spiritual world, we do not have logical chains, but events. We no longer have causality, but intentionality, in a philosophical sense, I mean. And the glimpse of the logoi appears as an outcome of symbolic approach and illumination from the Holy Spirit. However, rationality is an intermediary step. The rational character is present in the whole creation, and the glimpse of the logos is a rational one, not just a simple intuition. I mean, if you have a glimpse of a logos, then you must understand it in order to communicate to others. So, in this case, this glimpse is a super-rational thing. All the powers of the human soul, including the discursive reasoning, is illuminated by the power of Holy Spirit. This is, in fact, the natural contemplation. And Saint Gregory of Palamas said that the final vocation of mind is not making realities, but praying and contemplation. And now let me describe a nice model of the world, which was due to Saint Maximus the Confessor. Namely, the world is modeled by a sphere having in the center the Logos, the Christ. The radii of the sphere are the logoi, and the surface represent the created world. This is the equivalent of so-called Big Bang theory or M theory today in science, because we have the Big Bang, the point of Big Bang, and then the whole universe appeared. In addition, Saint Maximus the Confessor underlines that there are 5 modes of natural contemplation. In a sense, they are isomorphic with the 5 categories of Plato in the Sophist, in the book of Sophist. They are the following: substance, motion, differentiation, union, and stability. All these modes or categories have specific spiritual dimension. Substance teaches us theology of the being, existence. Motion teaches us providence, controlling the energy of the universe. Differentiation or difference teaches us the discernment or judgment. Unity teaches us the free thinking or free will, because the union shows the extraordinary variety of combination of things in the world. The highest in a spiritual sense is the coupling between freedom and virtues, heading directly to God. And stability indicates the voluntary morality or voluntary virtues. Moreover, the first 3 modes shows exactly the meaning of the Holy Cross, because Saint Maximus said that the Trinitarian meaning of the cross is exactly being, providence, and judgment. Think about the cross. We have the vertical part and the horizontal part. The upper vertical part is the being, because it's related to God. The lower vertical part is because it's entered into the earth, is related to good and evil, so is related to judgment. And the horizontal part is, in fact, the providence of the God. So, in fact, the whole cross is given by these three modes of natural contemplation. But using this symbolistic approach, we can say another thing very important. God and theology and being is related to what in the visible universe? Is related to matter. Providence is related to what? To motion, which is related to the energy. And judgment is related to information. But the whole visible universe is nothing but matter, energy, and information. Accordingly, the Holy Cross mystery is nothing but the essence of the physical universe. Returning to the mode, one can see that they are in an ascending way, starting from a general being and finishing with the something related to humans, namely the voluntary virtues. And one can see that they match in a sense with the 5 gifts of the Holy Ghost bestowed in the chrismation, namely the gift of counsel, the gift of science, the gift of knowledge, the gift of understanding, and the gift of wisdom. The gift of counsel gives discernment or judgment. The gift of science teaches us how to make good. The knowledge says how to see the logos of any virtue. The gift of understanding it helped me to identify myself with all the logo of the virtues. And finally, the wisdom shows me the union with Jesus Christ. The 5 modes of natural contemplation and the 5 steps of knowledge, gifts of the Holy Spirit, form the what? The psaltery of the way toward God. Because I have 5 modes for natural contemplation, 5 in the gifts of the Holy Ghost. So in this way, in this case, we can have, let's say, a dualistic description of what is nature and what is our soul. Now, how much time do I have? 5 minutes? Okay. Well, what I would like in the last 5 minutes to show you, I wrote a paper some years ago about how to make deduction, how to deduce laws of physics from the Ten Commandments. Because we don't have time, I will show you only let's say 3 parts. The laws of physics, there are many things. There are too many topics, too many domains in the physics, but there are 3 main laws which are fundamental. First one is the rationality of the nature. Everything in nature is rational. Second is the transcendence of divinity. The divinity is transcendent because otherwise we cannot make physics. Because if in a point there is a God, then the space is not homogeneous. If the space is not homogeneous, I cannot apply the laws of mechanics. Also, we have the universality of the laws of physics, chemistry, and biology, because in the whole universe there are the same laws. The same physics is here, the same physics is in any far apart galaxy. Can we see these laws from some theological thing? Yes. Let us see give an example. What is in the second law from the Ten Commandments? No graven or images or likeness. No graven images. Don't worship graven images. Which means what? Which means that the God cannot be worshipped in the nature. This is exactly what I said today. God is transcendental in the nature. Then, do not take the Lord's name in vain. What means that? This is exactly that we cannot make a relativistic way of thinking for the word of Lord. This means that we have an absolute aspect of the Lord of God, of the word of Lord. So, which means exactly what I said before, that the laws of physics are absolute in the sense that they are in the whole universe. Many other examples can be done. So let me finish with the last example. Do not lie is one of the commandments. But who is the father of liars? Is the Satan. How is symbolized Satan in the Bible? By snake, right? Also by lions, but usually by snake. Why is symbolized by snake? Because snake is on the earth and is moving on a very curly trajectory. In physics, we do not have this. In physics, every object, every system, no matter is quantum or string theory of elementary particles, goes on the optimal trajectory. Optimal trajectory means that the action must be minimized. So in nature, everything is straight. It's not moving like this. So this is exactly the commandment, do not lie. That's all I had to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank you to all for having. Was an honor for us to having you here. So God bless you, and God bless Romania. And with this thought, we need to go outside and try to change the world. Thank you very much.